thinking about that night. It's been 6 years, but the memory is still sharp, like frostbite you can feel under the skin even after it heals. My uncle's farmhouse in rural Kentucky never seemed sinister by daylight. It was just old, faded white paint, porch swing with rusted chains, 30 acres of pasture stitched together with wire fence. The kind of place that smelled like hay, diesel, and rain. But when the sun went down, when that last bit of orange light drained from the fields, it became something else entirely. No street lights, no neighbors, just silence so deep it hummed in your ears. You could hear your heartbeat in it, slow and thick. And sometimes, if you stayed quiet long enough, you'd realize the silence wasn't empty. It was listening back. My aunt was the first to notice. She's the type who laughs at ghost shows and scoffs at creaky floors. But a few months after they moved in, she started hearing things outside. Footsteps on the gravel driveway long after midnight. Slow, heavy, deliberate steps. Then came the splash. It always happened in that order. Footsteps first, then splash. Like someone walked up from the road, across the yard, and straight into the pond. She'd shine her flashlight through the window and see only ripples spreading on the water's surface. No footprints in the gravel. No sound after. Just the dogs trembling at the door, their tails pressed tight to their legs. My uncle said it was raccoons. Maybe a deer. She didn't argue, but she stopped sitting on the porch after dark. I remember the first Sunday dinner she told us about it. I laughed. Probably a heron, I said. They wade through ponds at night. Herons don't sound like boots, she said quietly. She wasn't joking. My cousin Eddie, their only son, was a skeptic. Engineering student, data-oriented, logical. Mom stressed, he said. She grew up in town. Every noise out here sounds like Bigfoot. When she told him about the footsteps and the splash, he decided to prove her wrong. I'll stay home alone while you two visit Grandma this weekend, he said. I'll record everything. You'll see it's nothing. He was 23. Confident, bored, brave in the way people are before life gives him a reason not to be. That Friday, he set up his camera on a tripod facing the front window, put 2 beers on the coffee table, turned on the TV for background noise. The dogs, both German shepherds, lay near his feet. He texted me around midnight. Dead quiet. Mom's nuts. I didn't hear from him again until the next morning. When my phone rang at 9 a.m., his voice didn't sound like his. It was high, breathless. The way people sound when they're pretending not to cry. Come get me, he said. Where? Sunoco off Highway 12. That was a 20-minute drive from the farm. When I found him, he was sitting barefoot on the curb outside the gas station. Sweatpants, t-shirt, no shoes. His feet were raw, scratched by gravel. His eyes were bloodshot. He didn't even wait for me to park. He opened the passenger door and got in, locking it behind him like a reflex. What the hell happened? He just stared straight ahead. Then, slowly, I heard it. It started around 2:15 a.m., he said. The dogs woke first. Their ears perked up, heads snapping toward the door. Then came the gravel crunching. Steady, rhythmic. The weight of boots on crushed stone. He muted the TV. The steps got louder. The dogs backed up, growling, hackles raised. Then the splash came. Loud, heavy, like something the size of a man, or bigger, had jumped in. I thought maybe someone was trespassing, he said. So I grabbed the flashlight and went to window. The pond was glowing, not like light from above, like something under the surface was burning dim and cold, bluish white. He saw ripples spreading outward from the center. Then the pounding started. Not knocking, he said. Pounding. Like fists. 3 hits. Each one made the door rattle in its frame. The dogs lost it. Barking, whining, running in circles. Eddie froze. He said water started dripping from the small window in the door. Just a few drops at first, then steady rivulets sliding down the glass like rain. Except it wasn't raining. Another 3 hits. Harder this time. The whole house shook. I ran, he whispered. He bolted through the kitchen, out the back, across the field barefoot. The dogs followed. He didn't stop running until he hit the road. He never went back. When my aunt and uncle came home the next day, they found everything just as he'd left it. Beer half finished, TV still on, front door locked. No damage. No footprints. No mud. The only thing out of place was the dogs. They were waiting on the porch, muddy up to their chests, tails tucked tight. They drained the pond a few months later. Found nothing but silt and trash, beer cans, branches, an old tire. The county filled it in after that. My aunt never heard the footsteps again. Eddie moved to Cincinnati, got a job at a tech firm. Never talks about that night unless he's had a few drinks. One time, after 3 beers, he told me he dreamed about the pond. Said he saw something rising out of it, long, pale fingers breaking the surface first, followed by a shape that wasn't quite human. It had a face, but no eyes, just smooth skin where the socket should be. It was dripping, he said, dripping even though it wasn't raining. He woke up with his sheets damp. I told him it was just a nightmare. He nodded like he believed me, but his hands were shaking. 2 years later, new owners bought the farmhouse. They rebuilt the barn, planted corn where the pond used to be. I stopped by once out of curiosity. The place looked brighter, cleaner, but when I got out of the car, the air felt the same. Heavy, the kind of stillness that waits. I didn't stay long. A few months after that, my aunt mailed me a flash drive. No note, just a drive and a small envelope. I plugged it in. There was one file, nightfootage.mov. It was Eddie's recording from that night. The first few hours were boring. He watched TV. The dogs slept. Around 2:10 a.m., they lifted their heads. You could hear faint crunching outside, then silence. At 2:14, the video glitched. A single frame froze, the pond visible through the front window, glowing faintly blue. Then came the pounding. The camera trembled on its tripod. 3 booming hits. Between the second and third, for one frame, something appeared at the window. A hand, not flesh-colored. White, like milk poured into water. Fingers too long, pressed against the glass. Then the image flickered, and Eddie's voice screamed off camera. No, no, no. The camera fell. The last thing it caught was the dogs barking, teeth bared at the door. The video cut off at 2:17 a.m. I sat frozen for a long time after that. I called my aunt. She didn't answer. I left a voicemail asking about the flash drive. She never called back. A week later, I got a text from Eddie. You watched it, didn't you? I replied, yeah. Where did she get it? Mom found it when they cleaned the attic before moving. The camera wasn't there before. She swears it just appeared on the couch one morning. Did you watch it? No, he said. And don't. He never mentioned it again. Years later, I passed by the farm while driving south. Couldn't resist stopping. The pond was long gone, replaced by rows of soybeans. But standing there, you could still see where the ground dipped slightly, a soft depression the shape of the old waterline. Something about it made me uneasy. The soy plants in that area were pale, almost silvery compared to the dark green ones around them. When the wind blew, they moved out of rhythm with the rest. Last summer, Eddie called me out of nowhere. I hadn't heard from him in years. He sounded drunk, or maybe just tired. You ever wonder what it wanted? He asked. What it wanted? The thing in the pond. He paused, then said, sometimes I hear it again. When it rains. The splash. Always 3 steps first, then splash. I told him to stop drinking and hung up. But that night, lying in bed, I dreamed about walking on gravel. 3 steps, then a splash. When I woke up, my window was open. My carpet was wet. I tried rationalizing. Maybe rain leaked in. But the forecast had been clear. For a week, nothing else happened. Then one night, my phone buzzed. A new email from no one. The sender field was blank. Subject line, look outside. Attached was a photo. It was my backyard, taken from somewhere near the fence. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. There was nothing unusual at first glance, just the grass, the shadow of my house, the faint reflection of the moon. But when I zoomed in, I saw it, a shape standing near the bird bath. Tall, too thin. Its reflection shimmered faintly, like light through water. I deleted the email immediately. 2 nights later, my dog refused to go near the back door. She stood rigid, staring at it, growling deep in her throat. When I opened it, the porch light flickered and I heard it, soft and deliberate. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Gravel. There's no gravel in my yard. I moved apartments that month. Didn't tell Eddie. Didn't tell anyone. But sometimes, on heavy nights when the air feels thick before rain, I swear I can hear it again. 3 slow steps. And then the splash. Even when there's no water for miles. The green light in the woods. This happened about 7 years ago during our annual family reunion at my grandparents' hunting cabin. It's one of those places so remote that your phone becomes nothing more than a camera, absolutely 0 bars of service. The cabin sits deep in the woods in northern Michigan, and you have to drive about 40 minutes down a dirt road after leaving the highway just to reach it. That particular reunion was bigger than usual. My parents were there along with my brother Jake, my aunt and uncle with their 3 kids, my grandparents, of course, and even my mom's cousin and her husband, who rarely made it to family events. The cabin itself isn't that big, just 4 bedrooms, a main room with a kitchen and a screened-in porch. So it was pretty crowded with all 14 of us there. The day had been normal enough. We'd gone fishing at the lake about a mile from the cabin, had the traditional big cookout with way too much food, and spent the evening around the fire pit telling stories and roasting marshmallows. Nothing unusual at all, just family stuff. As the night wore on, people started heading inside to sleep. My youngest cousin fell asleep in my aunt's lap first. Then the older folks started yawning and making their way to bed. By around 11 at night, it was just me and Jake still sitting by the fire. I was 23 at the time, and he was 25. We weren't really talking much, just staring at the dying embers and enjoying the quiet after a day of constant family chatter. The fire had burned down to mostly coals by then, giving off just enough light to see the immediate area around the pit, but not much beyond. The cars, 5 or 6 of them, were parked in a row maybe 30 feet from where we sat, just barely visible in the dim glow. Everyone had parked along the edge of the clearing where the cabin sits. I remember feeling really peaceful, listening to the crackling of the last bits of wood and the chorus of frogs and crickets in the woods. The moon was just a sliver that night, so beyond the glow of our fire, everything was pitch black. You know how dark it gets when you're really away from civilization. It's not like regular darkness. It's complete, the kind where you can't see your hand in front of your face. That's when I first noticed it. At first, I thought I was seeing things, like when your eyes play tricks on you in the dark, but then Jake tensed up beside me, and I knew he'd spotted it too. Between the cars, maybe 3 feet off the ground, was a solid bar of green light. It wasn't a beam like from a flashlight. It was a shape, a horizontal bar about a foot long. The green wasn't neon bright, but it wasn't dim either. It was steady and solid. And the color was wrong somehow, not like any flashlight or glow stick I'd ever seen. It was a deep, almost emerald green, but with an unnatural quality to it. Do you see that? Jake whispered, his voice sounding strange in the quiet night. I nodded, then realized he might not see the gesture in the dark. Yeah, I whispered back. What is that? We watched as this bar of light moved between the first 2 cars. It wasn't bobbing or swaying like it would if someone were carrying it. It moved at the steady, perfectly even pace. Too steady for a person walking, and there was no sound at all. No footsteps, no rustling, nothing. Just this eerie, silent green bar gliding along. As it passed between the cars, it cast a faint green tint onto the bumpers and the sides of vehicles. The reflection made it clear this wasn't just our imagination. It was something physically there, giving off light. Should we wake everyone up? I asked, not taking my eyes off the light. Let's see what it is first. Jake said, standing up slowly. I stood too, but neither of us moved toward it right away. We just watched as the green bar made its way methodically past all the cars. It wasn't in a hurry. It moved like it had all the time in the world, which somehow made it even more unsettling. When it reached the last car, my grandfather's old pickup truck, the light paused for maybe 3 seconds, just stopped completely. Then it started moving again, heading behind the cabin where there's nothing but woods. "Come on," Jake whispered and started walking cautiously toward where the light had been. I followed, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. We scurried around the cars, keeping our eyes on the green bar as it continued its steady path. As we moved away from the fire, the darkness pressing around us, I could barely make out Jake's shape ahead of me, just a silhouette against the slightly less dark background of the clearing. The light was rounding the corner of the cabin now, heading toward the back. There's nothing back there, just a small storage shed about 20 yards from the cabin, and then dense forest beyond that. No paths, no clearings, nothing. We followed it, staying maybe 30 feet behind. I don't know why we didn't call out or try to catch up to it. Something about that light made me instinctively keep my distance. As we moved around the cabin, we lost the faint glow from the fire pit completely. Now the only light was that green bar moving steadily ahead of us. The back of the cabin was pitch black. The few windows were dark. Everyone inside was asleep. I could hear Jake's breathing next to me as we paused at the corner of the building, watching the green light continue on its path toward the tree line. "What the hell is it?" I whispered, my voice sounding thin and scared even to my own ears. Jake didn't answer. He just put his hand on my arm, a gesture to stay quiet, I think. We stood there watching as the light maintained the exact same speed, never faltering, never changing. It was now approaching the edge of the woods. We started following again, moving slowly over the uneven ground. I nearly tripped on a root, catching myself just in time. The light didn't react to the sound at all. It just kept moving. Something strange was happening with the distance between us and the light. We were walking toward it, but somehow we weren't getting any closer. At the same time, it wasn't pulling away from us either. It was like we were locked at this exact distance, close enough to see it clearly, but never close enough to make out what was creating it. The light reached the first trees and continued on, now weaving between the trunks. We stopped at the edge of the woods. Even in the daytime, those woods are dense and hard to navigate. At night, with no flashlights, it would have been suicide to try to follow it in. So we stood there at the border between the clearing and the forest, watching as the green bar moved deeper among the trees. It was maybe 50 feet in now, still visible between the trunks, still moving at that same steady pace. And then it happened. The light didn't fade or flicker or gradually disappear. It simply vanished. 1 second it was there, gliding between two large oaks, and the next, nothing. Total darkness. It was so sudden it made me gasp, like someone had flipped a switch. We stood frozen, staring into the darkness where the light had been. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Maybe a minute, maybe 10. I was straining my eyes so hard trying to see something, anything, that I started seeing spots. Should we go look? I finally whispered. Jake was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "Let's go back." We turned and made our way carefully back around the cabin. The fire pit was just a dull red glow now, barely giving off any light at all. Neither of us spoke as we walked back to it. I felt cold despite the mild summer night, and I could tell Jake was shaken too. When we reached the fire, Jake kicked some dirt over the remaining embers. "We should go in," he said, his voice sounding more normal now, but still tight. "What about what we just saw?" I asked. He shrugged, but I could tell it was forced casualness. "I don't know what it was, but I don't think we should mention it to the others. You know how Grandpa gets with his ghost stories, and the kids will be scared." I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I agreed. Part of me wanted to wake everyone up, to have more witnesses, to confirm we weren't losing our minds, but another part of me understood what Jake meant. What would we even say? That we saw a floating green bar of light that disappeared into the woods? It sounded ridiculous, even though I knew what I'd seen. We went inside, stepping carefully around sleeping cousins on air mattresses in the main room, and found our spots, Jake on the couch and me on the floor beside it. I don't think either of us slept much that night. I know I didn't. I kept replaying what we'd seen in my mind, trying to make sense of it. The next morning, while everyone was having breakfast, Jake and I went outside to check the area where we'd seen the light. In the daylight, there was nothing unusual, no footprints, no disturbed vegetation, nothing that would indicate anything had passed through there. We never mention it to the rest of the family. Over the years, Jake and I have brought up occasionally when we're alone, trying to figure out what it could have been. We looked online for similar experiences, researched strange lights in forests, checked local legends, everything. Nothing matches what we saw. Was it some kind of weird natural phenomenon? A prank by locals? Some military test? I've gone through every possible explanation, but none of them fit exactly what we witnessed. I've been back to the cabin several times since then. Each time I find myself staring into the darkness at night, watching for that green light. Part of me wants to see it again, to confirm it was real. Another part of me dreads the possibility. It's been 7 years, and I still get chills thinking about that night. The eeriest part wasn't just the light itself, but the deliberate way it moved, like it had purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going. And sometimes, in the moments before sleep, I can't help but wonder, what if it wasn't moving away from us that night? What if it was leading us somewhere? And what would have happened if we'd followed it into those woods? The thing in the woods. I got to get this off my chest because it's been eating me alive. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but I swear every word is true. Maybe someone out there has seen similar things and can help me make sense of it all. I've lived my entire life in this tiny speck of a town in rural Ohio, right near the Kentucky border. Our house sits on the edge of civilization, with nothing but 2 massive stretches of private forest behind us. Most days it's peaceful, beautiful, even, but there's something not right about those woods. Growing up, I spent countless hours exploring the forest. I know every creek bed, every fallen tree, every deer trail for miles. The wildlife was always what you'd expect. Plenty of deer, raccoons scavenging around, coyotes howling at night, and every couple years, a black bear passing through. Normal stuff. But then there are the other things. The things I can't explain. The first time I noticed something was off, I was 9 years old. My dad and I had been clearing brush near the edge of our property. We'd moved this massive log, had to be 50, maybe 60 pounds, and left in a pile by the tree lean. The next morning, I was waiting for the school bus at the end of our long driveway. It was early, still pretty dark out, and dead quiet except for the birds starting to wake up. That's when I heard it, a weird rustling sound coming from the trees, followed by this deep, rumbling growl that made the hair on my neck stand straight up. It wasn't like a dog or coyote. It was deeper, bigger. Before I could even process what I was hearing, there was a loud crack, and suddenly that same massive log we'd moved the day before came shooting out of brush like it had been fired from a cannon. The thing spun through the air and crashed halfway across our yard, way closer to me than it had any right to be. It wasn't rolled or pushed. It was thrown hard. Whatever threw it had to be incredibly strong. I froze completely. Couldn't even breathe. I kept staring at the tree lean, but I never saw what did it. After what felt like forever, the bus finally came, and I ran to it, never mentioning what happened to anyone. Who would believe a 9-year-old kid anyway? For a while after that, I convinced myself I'd imagined it or exaggerated in my head. Maybe the log wasn't as heavy as I thought. Maybe an animal had just rolled it somehow. I came up with every explanation except the obvious one. Something in those woods had thrown it. A couple of years passed without incident. Then one night, when I was 11, I had 2 friends staying over. We were up late, probably around 11 or midnight, just talking and being stupid kids in my bedroom on the 2nd floor. My window faced the backyard and the forest beyond. I was in the middle of telling some dumb joke when one of my friends suddenly went quiet and pointed out the window. "What's that?" he asked. I turned to look, and that's when I saw it. A figure, unmistakably person-shaped, but wrong, walking along the tree lean at the edge of our property. This thing was enormous. Even from a distance, I could tell it was tall, 6 feet at minimum, but probably closer to 7 or 8. It had a weird hulking shape, super broad shoulders, and a thick upper body that tapered down. The proportions were just off, and the way it moved was the worst part. It was so quiet, so smooth, like it was gliding almost. No stumbling or crunching leaves like you'd expect from something that size moving through underbrush in the dark. All 3 of us saw it. We ducked down below the window sill immediately like we'd rehearsed it. Nobody said a word. We were terrified it would somehow know we'd seen it. After a few minutes, we worked up the courage to peek again, but whatever was had moved on. We didn't look out that window again until morning. The next day, my friends and I tried to rationalize what we'd seen. Maybe it was just some guy trespassing, hunting illegally on our land. But deep down, we all knew that explanation didn't fit. The size was wrong. The movement was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. For years after that, I'd occasionally hear strange noises at night. Heavy footsteps circling our house sometimes, or branches breaking way too loudly in the distance. But I never saw anything substantial again until a few years ago. I'd taken up jogging to stay in shape, and I'd mapped out this trail that went pretty deep into the forest behind our property. On this particular day, it was early autumn, perfect weather for a long run. I'd gone about a mile past where people usually venture. There are no marked trails back there, just game paths and natural clearings. I was pushing myself, feeling good, when I had to navigate through a patch of thorny bushes. They were thick and grabby, tearing at my clothes. But I knew there was a nice little clearing on the other side that would make for easier running. When I broke through to the clearing, the first thing that hit me was a silence. I'm not talking about peace and quiet. I'm talking about complete and utter silence. No bird singing, no leaves rustling, no insects buzzing, nothing. It was like someone had hit a mute button on the entire forest. I stopped running immediately, that instinctive part of my brain screaming that something was very, very wrong. That's when I heard it, the sound of heavy branches snapping to my left. Not small twigs breaking under a rabbit's weight, but thick branches being shattered. I turned toward the noise, and what I saw still keeps me up at night. About 30 yards away, moving through the trees at the edge of the clearing, was something. It was enormous, standing upright on two legs, but moving with a speed that nothing that size should be capable of. It was covered in thick, matted fur, mostly black, but with streaks of dark brown and patchy tan areas. The fur wasn't uniform or clean like you'd see on a healthy animal. It looked ragged, almost like it was partially missing in places. I couldn't make out its face clearly. Thank God for that, but I caught a glimpse of its profile as it sprinted across the gap between two thick trees. The head seemed too small for the body, almost sitting directly on those massive shoulders with barely any neck. Its arms were long, swinging as it ran, occasionally using them to push off trees to change direction. It moved with this terrifying purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going and what it was doing, and it was fast, freakishly, impossibly fast. It crossed that clearing in seconds, disappearing into the dense forest on the other side. I stood frozen for maybe 10 seconds before my survival instinct kicked in. I turned and ran back toward home faster than I've ever run in my life, not caring about the thorns tearing at my skin as I crashed back through those bushes. The entire time I felt like something was right behind me, about to grab me with massive hands. I didn't stop running until I burst out of the tree lean and saw my house. Since then, things have gotten worse. 2 winters ago, after a heavy snow, I found footprints leading from the woods up to our house and around the back. They were huge, easily 15 inches long, and the stride length was close to 4 feet. Whatever made them was taking steps twice as long as a normal human. I've heard tree knocks at night. Hard, deliberate sounds of wood striking wood. Sometimes they come in patterns. 3 quick knocks, then 2 slow ones, then 3 quick again, like some kind of signal. Other nights, I've heard what sounds almost like a distant voice, too low and guttural to be human, but definitely trying to mimic speech. Twice now, something has slammed into the side of our house hard enough to rattle the windows and knock pictures off the wall. The first time, I thought a deer had crashed into it. The second time, it hit with such force that I'm certain it was intentional. When I checked outside both times, I found nothing. No blood, no fur, no evidence of what had struck with such force. The stray cats that used to hang around our property have almost all vanished. We used to have at least 6 or 7 that we'd feed occasionally. Now there's only one, and it refuses to venture more than a few feet from the porch, even for food. I don't know if what I've been seeing is one creature or several. I don't know if it's some undiscovered species or something else. What I do know is that I'm not imagining it, and it's not going away. If anything, it seems bolder now, coming closer to the house, staying visible for longer periods. Last week, I was taking the trash out at dusk when I heard breathing. Not just any breathing, deep, rumbling breaths from something with massive lungs. It was coming from just beyond the tree line, not 20 yards from where I stood. I dropped the trash bag and ran inside, locking the door behind me. I've thought about setting up game cameras, but part of me doesn't want to know. What if I catch something on film that doesn't make sense? What if I see something I can't unsee? Or worse, what if these things become aware they're being watched and decide to do something about it? My parents think I'm letting my imagination run wild. No one in town talks about anything strange in those woods, though a few of the older locals get real quiet when I bring up weird noises at night. One old-timer at the general store just shook his head and told me, some parts of those woods ain't meant for people. Never were. Then he changed the subject. Whatever walks those border woods is still out there. I hear it most nights now, circling closer, testing boundaries. I don't go jogging in the deep woods anymore. I don't even like being outside after dark. But I can't move away. This is my home, my family's land for generations. So I'm stuck here, listening to something massive moving just beyond the trees, wondering when it'll decide to stop watching and finally show itself completely, and wondering what I'll do when that happens. I've been putting off writing this for months, but I need to get it off my chest. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened during that night shift at the school where I work as a security guard. This happened back in April 2020, right when CO was hitting hard. The school I work at is this old New England campus. Been around since the late 1800s. It's one of those prestigious boarding schools with beautiful old brick buildings mixed with some newer construction. When the pandemic hit, they evacuated all the students practically overnight. One day, the place was bustling with teenagers. The next day, it was a ghost town. I'd worked there for about 3 years at that point, but I'd never seen the campus completely empty before. Usually, even during breaks, there were international students who stayed behind or faculty members living in their campus housing. But with CO, it was just the security guards, 4 of us total working in rotation. The campus is pretty spread out. There are 8 student dormitories, beautiful old brick buildings with slate roofs. There's also what we call the adult dorm where some teachers live, but the top floors have been abandoned for years. We have these old condos that got converted to administrative offices, an old Victorian house that's now the admissions office, a New England church, a boathouse down by the river, an old library, and the original school building which dates back to the school's founding. Then there are the newer buildings, the rec center, sports complex, science building, and art center, all built within the last 15 years. My shift that night started at 11 p.m. It was unseasonably cold for April, and there was this eerie fog hanging over the campus. I remember thinking how the empty buildings looked like something out of a horror movie, all dark and looming in the mist. We were supposed to do a full campus check every 2 hours, which meant walking through every building to make sure nothing was amiss. This was new protocol because of the pandemic. They were worried about break-ins or vandalism with the campus being so empty. I started my first round at midnight. The newer buildings were fine. Nothing unusual. I checked the rec center, which has this big indoor pool that was covered and drained. The whole place smelled like chlorine, even though nobody had used it in weeks. The sports complex was normal, too, just dark and empty. The silence was what got to me the most. Usually, these places would have sounds. Fans running, students talking, music playing, but now there was just nothing. Everything was going fine until I got to the science building around 1 o'clock in the morning. The science building is connected to the old school building by an enclosed walkway. I just finished checking all 3 floors of the science center and was about to cross over. That's when I heard it. Footsteps running footsteps on the floor above me. I froze because it made no sense. I was on the top floor of the science building, and the only thing above me was a mechanical room with the HVAC systems, which was only accessible from outside. And these weren't mechanical sounds. They were unmistakably footsteps like someone wearing hard-soled shoes running across the floor. I called out, "Hello, security here." Is someone there? My voice echoed in the empty hallway. The footsteps stopped immediately. I figured maybe it was one of the other guards, though they weren't supposed to be in this section. I radioed in. Hey, is anyone in the science building? My colleague Tony responded. Negative. I'm over in the library, and Jake is in the admin building. You all right? Yeah, just thought I heard something. Probably the building settling. But I knew that wasn't it. Buildings settling don't sound like running footsteps. I crossed over into the old school building, which always gave me the creeps, even when it was full of people. It's 4 stories tall with narrow hallways, creaky wooden floors, and classrooms with those old-fashioned transoms above the doors. The first floor was quiet, and I methodically checked each classroom, turning my flashlight into dark corners and behind doors. As I started up the stairs to the second floor, I heard the footsteps again. This time they were directly above me on the 3rd floor. Quick steps moving from one end of the hallway to the other, then stopping. I hesitated on the stairs, my heart starting to pound. I told myself it had to be an explanation. Maybe an animal got in somehow, a raccoon or something. But deep down, I knew those were human footsteps. I made my way to the 2nd floor, listening. Nothing. I continued up to the 3rd floor, where I'd heard the sounds. The hallway was empty. All classroom doors were closed and locked as they should be. I checked each one anyway, rattling the handles to confirm they were secure. They were. Just as I was about to head up to the 4th floor, I heard footsteps again, but this time they were coming from the floor below me, where I'd just been. It sounded like someone running from one end of the hallway to the other. My mouth went dry. There was no way anyone could have gotten past me on the stairs. The building only had one staircase that connected all floors, and I would have seen someone. I radioed in again. Guys, are you absolutely sure no one else is in the old school building? Positive, came the reply. What's going on? I keep hearing footsteps, but there's nobody here. Old buildings make noise, man. Especially when the temperature changes at night. Yeah, maybe. I decided to skip the 4th floor of the old building. At this point, I just wanted to get out of there. I headed back down the stairs, moving quickly, but trying not to run. I didn't want to admit to myself that I was scared, but I was. I left the old school building and headed for the Art Center, which was my next stop. The Art Center is one of the newer buildings with big open spaces for the art studios, music practice rooms, and a small theater. I figured I'd feel better in there. Newer buildings are less creepy, right? I used my key card to enter through the main doors. The lobby was dark except for the exit signs casting a red glow. I turned on the lights and felt some of my tension ease in the bright modern space. That's when I heard the voices. They were faint at first, just the sound of 2 people talking, their words indistinct, but the cadence unmistakable. It sounded like they were upstairs, maybe in one of the practice rooms or art studios. Hello, I called out. Security. The building is supposed to be closed. The voices continued uninterrupted. They didn't seem to notice or care that I was there. I headed up the stairs to the 2nd floor, where I thought the voices were coming from. As soon as I reached the top of the stairs, the talking stopped abruptly. Then came a loud slam like a door being forcefully closed. I moved toward the sound, which seemed to come from the multi-purpose room, a space used for club meetings and movie screenings. The door was closed but not locked. I hesitated, then opened it slowly. The room was empty. No sign that anyone had been there. The chairs were stacked against the wall, and the projection screen was rolled up. I checked behind the AV cabinet and in the small storage closet. Nothing. I was about to leave when something caught my eye. There's a large window on one wall of the room, and with the lights on, it created a reflection of the room. In that reflection, I saw something that wasn't there when I looked directly at the room. A face. A blue face like someone who couldn't breathe. It was shorter than me, maybe the height of a young teenager, and it seemed to be struggling for air. I spun around, but there was nobody there. I looked back at the window, and the reflection was gone. I've never felt fear like that before. My whole body went cold, and I couldn't move for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. Then I ran. I just flat out ran out of that room, down the stairs, and out of the building. I didn't even turn off the lights. Outside, I stood in the parking lot, trying to catch my breath and convince myself I hadn't seen what I'd just seen. My radio crackled. It was my supervisor wondering why I'd stopped reporting my location. I'm outside the art center. I managed to say, taking a short break. Everything all right? Yeah, fine. I couldn't bring myself to finish the security check that night. I went back to the guard station and made up some excuse about not feeling well. The next day, I told my boss what happened. He's this older British guy who's been working at the school for decades. I expected him to laugh it off, but he didn't. Instead, he told me two stories. The first was about his own experience in one of the old buildings years ago when he felt cornered by something he couldn't see but could definitely feel. He said he'd never been so terrified in his life. The second story was about the history of the campus. Apparently, back in the early 1900s, there were two boys who used to play on a homemade raft in the river near where the boathouse now stands. One day, one of the boys fell off and drowned. The other boy tried to get help, but it was too late. According to my boss, there have been sightings over the years of what people believe is the ghost of the drowned boy, a bluish figure that seems to be struggling to breathe. I've worked plenty of night shifts since then, but I've never experienced anything like that again. I still avoid the art center and the old school building when I can, especially at night. Sometimes I wonder if the emptiness of the campus during COVID somehow stirred things up, like the absence of living people, made it easier for the dead to be noticed. I don't know what I believe about ghosts or the paranormal, but I know what I heard and I know what I saw. That blue face in the window. I'll never forget it. And I can't help but wonder if that poor drowned boy is still there trying to get someone's attention after all these years. I've never told anyone about this before. I mean, I've tried explaining it to people, but they always brush it off as a weird childhood memory or me misremembering things. But I know what I saw that day at Camp Pinewood. And even now, 23 years later, I still can't explain it. This happened when I was 11 years old. My parents had shipped me off to summer camp in northern Michigan for 3 weeks. Something about building character and getting fresh air. I wasn't particularly outdoorsy, but I didn't mind it too much. The camp was pretty standard. Swimming in the lake, archery, campfires, all that stuff. We slept in these small wooden cabins with 4 bunks each. My cabin mates were 3 other boys my age. Tanner, who was super into dinosaurs and could tell you the difference between an Allosaurus and a T-Rex like it was common knowledge. Derek, who was always sneaking in candy and had this ridiculous collection of Pokemon cards he brought, despite the counselor saying not to, and Mike, who was the athletic one, always talking about the baseball league he played in back home. We got along pretty well, considering we were just random kids thrown together. The cabin itself was nothing special. Wooden walls with little windows, bunk beds with thin mattresses, and this perpetual smell of pine and boys who didn't shower enough. My bunk was on the bottom right by the door, which I hated because people would always bump into my feet when they walked in. One of the camp's weird traditions was this mandatory quiet hour right after lunch. They called it rest period. But everyone knew it was really just nap time for kids, which felt ridiculous when you're 11 and think you're basically grown up. None of us ever actually slept during quiet hour. Instead, we'd whisper jokes or talk about whatever 11-year-old boys talk about, mostly gross stuff or complaining about which counselors were meanest. This particular day was maybe our 5th or 6th day at camp. It was hot dash, that sticky, humid kind of heat where your t-shirt just clings to your back. Lunch had been these saddle-looking hot dogs and baked beans that no one wanted to eat. We trudged back to our cabin for quiet hour, flopped on our bunks, and started our usual whispered conversations. Derek was telling us about how he'd snuck into the kitchen area and saw 2 of the counselors kissing, and we were all cracking up, not even trying to be quiet at this point. We were laughing, making kissing noises the whole thing. Mike was doing some ridiculous impression of the counselors, and Tanner was practically crying from laughing so hard. Then we heard footsteps on the wooden stairs outside our cabin door. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, the kind that said, "You're in trouble." "It's Jenkins," Derek hissed, referring to the head counselor, this middle-aged guy with a permanent sunburn and a voice that could cut through solid rock. We all immediately shut up and dove under our covers. I remember pulling my scratchy wool blanket right up to my chin and closing my eyes, trying to control my breathing to seem asleep. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whoever was at the door could hear it. The thing about quiet hour was that if you got caught talking 3 times, you had to sit out the evening activity, which that night was supposed to be a bonfire with Eskimo rays. The door creaked open. I kept my eyes shut tight, but I could sense the light changing as someone stood in the doorway. There was this moment of complete silence, and then a voice, but it wasn't Jenkins. It was Mr. Harmon, the camp director. He rarely interacted with us directly, usually leaving that to counselors. His voice was soft but firm, with this weird accent I couldn't place, not quite Southern, but something else. "You boys should be sleeping, not talking," he said very matter-of-factly. "Rest now." That was it. No scolding, no threats of punishment, just those few words. Then I heard the door close and his footsteps moving away. The whole interaction couldn't have taken more than 20 seconds. We'd gotten off easy, surprisingly easy. I waited about 30 seconds to make sure he was gone, then opened my eyes, ready to look over at the others and share a relieved laugh. But what I saw made my blood run cold. All 3 of them, Derek, Tanner, and Mike, were asleep, not pretending, but actually genuinely asleep. Derek had his mouth slightly open, breathing deeply. Tanner was curled up on his side, his face peaceful. Mike was flat on his back, chest rising and falling rhythmically. At first, I thought they were playing a joke on me. I whispered, "Guys, he's gone." No response. I tried again, a bit louder. "Hey guys, cut it out." Nothing. I sat up in my bed and looked at them more carefully. These weren't kids pretending to be asleep. I'd seen my little brother fake sleep plenty of times, and this wasn't that. They were out completely. I got up and walked over to Derek's bunk first, since it was closest to mine. I poked his shoulder. Derek, no reaction. I shook him a little harder. Nothing. His body was completely limp, his breathing deep and regular. I moved on to Tanner, then Mike, with the same results. They were all in this deep, unresponsive sleep. The weirdest part was how quickly it had happened. We had all been awake, wide awake, laughing and joking, literally seconds before. Then Mr. Harmon says a few words, and suddenly everyone but me is in a deep sleep. It made no sense. I went back to my bunk and sat there trying to process what was happening. The cabin had taken on this eerie quality I can't quite explain. It was still the same wooden walls, the same light filtering through the windows, but something felt different. The air seemed heavier, thicker somehow. There was this complete silence, except for the steady breathing of my cabin mates. I remember staring at the wall, this naughty pine plank right next to my bed, with a weird pattern in the wood that kind of looked like a face if you squinted. I stared at it for what felt like a long time, tried to make sense of what had just happened. Had Mr. Harmon done something to them? Was there something in the food at lunch that had finally kicked in? Was I going crazy? None of these explanations made any sense. But what I was seeing made even less sense. The whole thing was so unsettling that I eventually just laid back down. I didn't feel tired. I was actually wide awake from the adrenaline of the whole weird situation, but I just didn't know what else to do. I stared at the bunk above me, counting the wood slats supporting the mattress. 1, 2, 3. I must have eventually fallen asleep. 2, because the next thing I remember is being jolted awake by the camp bell ringing, signaling the end of quiet hour. I sat up quickly, disoriented. Around me, the other boys were waking up too, stretching and yawning like it was the most normal thing in the world. Derek was already talking about the swimming test we were supposed to do that afternoon. Completely casual. "Guys," I said, my voice sounding strange even to me, "do you remember what happened before we fell asleep?" They looked at me with confused expressions. "What do you mean?" Mike asked, pulling on his sneakers. "Before quiet hour, we were all talking, and then Mr. Harmon came in, and then you all just fell asleep." Tanner laughed. "I don't remember Mr. Harmon. I was out as soon as my head hit the pillow. Those beans at lunch made me so sleepy." "Yeah, I don't remember anything," Derek added. "Just laid down and conked out." I looked at them in disbelief, but we were laughing about the counselors kissing. You were all wide awake, and then Mr. Harmon came in and said we should be sleeping, and then you all just instantly fell asleep, like within seconds. They all exchanged glances. Dude, you must have been dreaming, Mike said, shrugging. I don't remember any of that. Yeah, I was definitely asleep the whole time, Tanner agreed. I tried to argue to make them remember, but they all had the same story. They'd come into the cabin, laid down, and fallen asleep almost immediately. None of them remembered talking or laughing. None of them remembered Mr. Harmon coming in. I eventually gave up trying to convince them. We went on with our day. Swimming test dinner, the bonfire with Esmores at night. But I couldn't shake the memory of what had happened or the unsettling feeling it left me with. The rest of camp passed without any similar incidents. I kept a close eye on Mr. Harmon whenever I saw him, but he never acted any differently toward me or acknowledged what had happened. He was just a camp director doing camp director things, making announcements at meals, chatting with parents on visiting day, organizing the end of camp talent show. When I got home, I tried telling my parents about it, but they dismissed it as a dream or my imagination. Over the years, I've occasionally brought up with friends, but the story always gets the same reaction. Either I dreamed it or misremembered, or it was just kids falling asleep because they were tired. But I know what I saw. I was wide awake. My cabin mates were wide awake. And then, in the span of 20 seconds, they weren't. But I still was. Sometimes I wonder if there was something in Mr. Harmon's words, some kind of hypnotic suggestion, or as ridiculous as it sounds, some kind of sleeping charm that somehow didn't work on me. Or maybe time did something weird in that cabin. Maybe I experienced some kind of time skip where what felt like seconds to me was actually minutes or even hours to everyone else. Enough time for them to naturally fall asleep. I've never been back to Camp Pinewood. My parents sent me to a different camp the next summer, and after that, I was old enough to stay home alone. I've tried searching online for information about Mr. Harmon or the camp, but it closed down in the early 2000s, and there's very little information available. To this day, I still don't know what happened in that cabin. Logic says there must be some rational explanation, but I've never been able to find one that fits. All I know is that I witnessed something I can't explain. Something that still gives me chills when I think about it too much. And sometimes when I'm having trouble falling asleep at night, I find myself thinking about Mr. Harmon's words. You should be sleeping, not talking. Rest now. And wondering what power those simple words held over everyone but me. I've never shared this online before, but I feel like I need to get this off my chest. It all started when I was about 7 years old, and it was the first time I experienced something unexplainable. Looking back now, it makes more sense why my mom always used to say that I attracted things from the spiritual realm. She'd tell stories about how even as a baby, weird things would happen around me. Toys turning on by themselves, lights flickering when I cried, that kind of stuff. I never thought much of it until I got older. My childhood wasn't exactly normal to begin with. My father died in a car accident when I was really young. I barely remember him, just fragments really. The smell of his aftershave, the sound of his laugh. My little sister had a different dad who had struggled with severe depression for years before ultimately taking his own life. So it was just us three, me, my sister, and my mom trying to make it work. My mom was amazing, working long shifts at the hospital to support us. But that meant she wasn't always around at night. She'd drop us off at different family friends who would babysit us while she worked those late hospital shifts. I never minded it much. It felt like having lots of aunts and uncles who weren't really related to us. One of these family friends was Rhonda. God, I haven't thought about her in years. She was this warm, gentle woman with the softest hands and the kindest smile. Her house always smelled like cinnamon and something else I could never quite place. Maybe vanilla. She lived alone in this modest 2-story house that had these creaky wooden floors. I remember being fascinated by her 2 talking birds, these colorful parakeetses that would repeat simple phrases like hello and what's up. I'd spend hours trying to teach them new words, but they never seemed interested in expanding their vocabulary beyond what they already knew. Anyway, this particular night I'm about to tell you about happened during summer break. My mom had a night shift, So she dropped us off at Rhonda's around 7 in the evening. It was still light outside, and we spent the first few hours watching cartoons and eating Rhonda's homemade chocolate chip cookies. My sister, who was about 5 at the time, was always clingy and afraid of everything. She hated sleeping alone and would throw absolute fits if forced to. When it got late around 9 or 10, Rhonda announced it was bedtime. My sister immediately started whining about not wanting to sleep alone, so Rhonda said she could sleep in her room upstairs. I, on the other hand, always got the spare bedroom downstairs. I didn't usually mind. It had these cool glow-in-the-dark star stickers on the ceiling that I loved watching as I fell asleep. That night, Rhonda tucked me in like she always did. She had this routine where she'd pull the covers up to my chin, kiss my forehead, and then check under the bed and in the closet for monsters. She'd leave the door cracked open just enough to let a thin strip of hallway light in. And then she'd head upstairs with my sister. I remember lying there in that bed, staring at those plastic stars that were slowly losing their glow. The house had these weird sounds that I'd normally ignore. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the house settling, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room. But that night, everything seemed louder somehow, more present, more intentional. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's the best way I can describe it. I tossed and turned for what felt like hours. I couldn't get comfortable, and this strange anxiety kept building in my chest. I wasn't normally an anxious kid, but that night I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, fear, but I couldn't pinpoint why. There was no thunderstorm, no scary movie I'd watched, nothing that should have triggered this feeling. The digital alarm clock on the nightstand read 11:32. I remember staring at those red numbers, debating whether I should go upstairs to Rhonda's room. I didn't want to seem like a baby. I was the big sister, after all. But something just felt off. I had almost convinced myself to get up when it happened. A voice, low, calm, and distinctly male, said, "Marissa, it's okay. Just go to sleep." It was so clear, so close, like someone was sitting on the edge of my bed. But when I jerked up to look, nobody was there. The room was empty except for me. Here's the weird part. I wasn't scared. Not immediately. Anyway, looking back as an adult, I should have been terrified. A strange man's voice in my room when I was alone. That's nightmare fuel. But as a 7-year-old who hadn't yet been conditioned to fear the paranormal, my first thought was more like, oh, someone's trying to help me sleep. The voice had this soothing quality to it, kind of like how you'd imagine a big brother or a nice uncle would sound. There was no malice in it, no threatening undertone, just gentle reassurance. And strangely enough, it worked. The anxiety that had been building in my chest started to dissipate. My eyelids grew heavy, and before I knew it, I was drifting off to sleep. I don't remember dreaming that night, just falling into this deep, peaceful sleep until morning. I woke up to the smell of pancakes and the sound of the birds chattering away in the living room. I rubbed my eyes, momentarily forgetting about the voice in the night before until I walked into the kitchen and saw Rhonda at the stove flipping pancakes. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she said with that warm smile of hers. "How did you sleep?" I climbed onto one of the kitchen chairs, my legs dangling above the floor. I was scared at first. I said matter-of-factly in the way that only kids can be, but then somebody told me to go to sleep, and I did. Rhonda's hand paused mid-flip. "What do you mean somebody told you to go to sleep? Did you have a dream?" I shook my head emphatically. No, I was awake. I couldn't sleep, and I was going to come upstairs. But then a voice told me it was okay and to go to sleep. She set the spatula down slowly and turned to face me fully. A voice, was it a man's voice or a woman's voice? A man's? I replied, reaching for syrup. He knew my name. He called me Marissa. I'll never forget the look on Rhonda's face in that moment. It was like watching someone's warm, comfortable expression crack and reveal something underneath. Not fear exactly, but a kind of uncomfortable recognition. Her smile stiffened, and she turned back to the stove quickly, her shoulders tense. "Well, you probably were dreaming and just don't remember falling asleep," she said, her voice a little too high, a little too forced. Dreams can seem very real sometimes. Before I could protest again that I was definitely awake, she changed the subject, asking if I wanted chocolate chips in my pancakes. And just like that, the moment passed. My sister came bounding down the stairs, complaining loudly about how the birds woke her up, and the rest of the morning carried on normally. My mom picked us up around noon, and I didn't think to mention the voice to her. Kids are resilient like that. Weird things happen, and we just absorb them into our understanding of the world, without much question. It wasn't until years later, when I was about 14, that the memory resurfaced. I was having a sleepover at a friend's house, and we were telling ghost stories. When it was my turn, I shared the story about the voice at Rhonda's house. As I was telling it, I realized how creepy it actually was, how it should have terrified me at the time. My friend was appropriately freaked out and insisted I ask my mom if Rhonda's house was haunted. The next day, I casually brought it up to my mom while she was folding laundry. "Hey, Mom, remember when Rhonda used to babysit us? Was her house haunted or something?" My mom paused, a half-folded towel in her hands. "Why do you ask that?" I shrugged, trying to seem nonchalant. I just remembered this weird thing that happened once. I heard a man's voice in the spare bedroom downstairs. It knew my name. The towel dropped from her hands, and she sat down on the edge of the bed. "You never told me about that." I guess I forgot until now. It wasn't scary or anything. The voice was nice. My mom looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. "I don't know if I should tell you this, but Rhonda had a son." "Had?" I asked, immediately picking up on the past tense. She nodded slowly. "He died in that room, the spare bedroom where you used to sleep. It was an overdose. Accidental. He was only in his 20s. A chill ran down my spine, despite the warm summer day. What was he like? A lot like Rhonda, actually. Kind, caring, always looking out for others. He had his demons, but he was a good person at heart." She paused and added, "That's probably why you weren't afraid when he spoke to you. Some presences aren't meant to frighten." That conversation opened something up in me. Or maybe it had always been open, and I just became more aware of it. Since that first experience, I've had many more encounters with things I can't explain. Shadow figures standing at the foot of my bed, objects moving on their own, whispers in empty rooms. The thing is, they've changed over the years. That first voice, the one I now believe belonged to Rhonda's son, was comforting, protective even. But as I've gotten older, the encounters have become darker, more hostile. Like whatever door was open in my childhood has let in entities that don't have my best interests at heart. I'm 32 now, and just last week, I woke up at 3:17 in the morning to find all the kitchen cabinets open. Every single one. I live alone. No one else has keys to my apartment. Sometimes I wonder if that night at Rhonda set something in motion, made me more receptive to things most people can't perceive. Or maybe my mom was right all along. Maybe I've always attracted things from the spiritual realm, and that voice was just the first one I was old enough to remember. Either way, I can't help but long for simplicity of that first encounter. A gentle voice telling me everything would be okay, because the things I sense watching me now, they don't feel gentle at all. I'm not even sure where to begin with this. I've been dealing with this nightmare for years now, and it's gotten to the point where I dread nighttime. Everyone talks about how nice it is to crawl into bed after a long day, to feel that sweet relief when your head hits the pillow. I honestly can't remember what that feels like. It started gradually. At first, I just had this weird feeling of not being alone in my room at night. You know that sensation when you think someone's watching you? It was like that, but stronger. I'd be drifting off to sleep and suddenly feel wide awake, my heart racing for no reason. Then I started seeing them. These, I don't even know what to call them. Shadow people. But that doesn't quite capture it. They're like stretched out human silhouettes, completely black, standing around my room. They appear right as I'm about to fall asleep. That crucial moment when you're drifting off but still slightly aware. I'll be almost gone. And then suddenly I'll see one of these things in the corner of my room, or beside my bed, or sometimes even leaning over me. And I'm instantly wide awake again, adrenaline pumping, too terrified to close my eyes. What's even weirder is this feeling I get in my chest right before I see them. It's like a physical warning system. There's this pressure, kind of painful, but not exactly. It's hard to describe. It's like a force or a sound, but inside my body. It's as if something is desperately trying to wake me up to keep me from falling asleep completely. And when I ignore it, that's when the really bad stuff happens. I've tried everything. Sleep aids just make it worse because then I'm too groggy to snap myself awake when I need to. I've moved apartments twice thinking maybe it was something about the place, but they followed me. I've gone to doctors who just throw antidepressants or anxiety meds at me, which don't help at all. One even suggested I was experiencing sleep paralysis, but I can move just fine during these episodes. Eventually, I just learn to function on whatever scraps of sleep I can get. Usually, I'll fight until I literally pass out from exhaustion for a few hours. It's not real sleep, not the restorative kind, but it's all I get. My whole life revolves around this now. I've lost jobs because I can't focus. Friends think I'm flaky because I cancel plans when I'm too exhausted. Dating is completely off the table. How do you explain to someone that they can't sleep over because the shadow people only appear when you're alone? But the worst part isn't the shadows themselves. It's what happens when I get desperate enough to ignore my body's warnings and try to force myself to sleep. Anyway, it's only happened 3 times, and each time was more terrifying than the last. The first time was about 2 years ago. I was going on 4 days with barely any sleep. I was hallucinating from exhaustion during the day, seeing things move in my peripheral vision, hearing whispers. I decided I was going to sleep no matter what. I turned my face to the wall and pulled the blanket up over my head completely. My thinking was simple. If I couldn't see them, maybe they wouldn't bother me. It actually worked for about an hour. I fell into the deepest sleep I'd had in months. Then I felt it. A hand. A large, cold hand with long, sharp nails. It started at the top of my head, just lightly touching my hair through the blanket. Then it slowly, so slowly, dragged down the back of my neck, across my shoulders and down my spine. The touch was deliberate, almost curious. I was paralyzed with fear for a few seconds. Then I launched myself out of bed, turning on every light in my apartment. I searched everywhere. Under the bed, though there is no under, I sleep on a mattress directly on the floor, in the closet behind the curtains. Nothing, no one. The doors were locked, windows closed. I was completely alone, which somehow made it worse. I didn't sleep for 2 more days after that. The second time was about 6 months later. I've been doing a bit better, managing to get maybe 3 hours a night by keeping a strict routine and sleeping with all the lights on. But one night, I was just so tired. I lay on my back with my arms crossed over my chest, trying to calm my racing mind. I felt the pressure in my chest, the warning, but I was so exhausted I pushed through it. Just as I was falling asleep, I jolted awake, and for just a millisecond, literally the briefest flash, I saw it. There was a black figure, humanoid, but wrong somehow, squatting directly on my chest. It was staring at me. I know that sounds impossible because it had no eyes, no face that I could discern, just a black silhouette. But I could feel its gaze. Its head was tilted slightly, like it was studying me. And even though it disappeared almost instantly, the feeling of being watched lingered for hours. I didn't try to ignore the warnings after that. I stuck to my exhaustion-induced mini blackouts for months. But about 8 weeks ago, I hit another wall. I hadn't had more than an hour of sleep at a time for over a week. I was making mistakes at work, almost crashed my car twice. I was desperate. I decided to try sleeping on my back again, thinking maybe the second incident was just a particularly bad episode of sleep paralysis like the doctor suggested. I laid down, felt the warning in my chest, and deliberately pushed past it. I was drifting off when I felt my mattress depressed like someone sitting down on the edge of my bed. I was frozen, too scared to open my eyes. Then I felt my blanket, which was pulled up to my nose, being slowly pulled down, exposing my face. The movement was gentle, almost tender. What happened next still makes me feel sick when I think about it. I felt what seemed like a kiss on my cheek near my neck. It was soft at first, and in my half-asleep state, it reminded me of how my mom used to wake me up when I was little. But then the pressure increased. What started as a kiss turned into a strong suction, like someone giving me a hickey, but much more powerful. It felt like it was trying to pull something out of me through my skin. I finally managed to break through my fear and jumped up, screaming. There was nothing there, just my empty room. The next morning, there was a dark bruise on my neck. I called my mom in a panic, wondering if maybe she had somehow been there, as crazy as that sounds. She was confused and concerned, telling me she'd been at home on the rooftop garden all night about 30 miles away. What makes all of this even more frustrating is that none of it happens when someone else is in the room with me. A few times when things were really bad, I've had a friend crash on my couch, and I slept perfectly those nights. No shadows, no warnings, no visitors. But I can't exactly ask people to sleep over every night forever. I'm at my breaking point. Last night, I saw 5 of the shadow figures, more than ever before. They were standing in a semicircle around my bed, just watching. The warning in my chest was so intense, it felt like I was having a heart attack. I've started hallucinating them during the day now, too. Just glimpses in dark corners or reflections. I don't know what they want. I don't know why they're fixated on me. Sometimes I think maybe I'm just losing my mind from chronic sleep deprivation. But the physical evidence, the bruise on my neck, the feeling of those nails on my back, it was all too real. I'm typing this at 3 o'clock in the morning because I'm too scared to close my eyes. They're here again, just at the edges of my vision, waiting. I feel like they're getting impatient with me, like they're building up to something. The warning in my chest has been constant for the past 2 days, not just when I'm trying to sleep. If anyone has experienced anything like this or knows what might be happening, please help me. I just want to sleep. I just want one night of peace without feeling like something is waiting for me to let my guard down. I'm so tired, so incredibly tired. I've started to wonder if maybe that's the point. Maybe they're wearing me down on purpose. Maybe when I'm too exhausted to fight anymore, that's when whatever they're planning will happen. And the thought that terrifies me most is, what if the 3 incidents weren't the worst of it? What if those were just the beginning? The hand that waited. I was the first time I heard the tapping. 5 the first time I saw the hand. And old enough now to know that the way I remember those nights isn't how memory is supposed to work. Childhood memories blur. Colors run. Edges soften. This one never did. It stayed perfect and cold, like a coin kept in the freezer. Orange nightlight glow. The rough buzz of carpet on my knees. The hallway air colder than my blanket. The sewing room that wasn't a room but a wall of absolute black. And then a hand, no arm, no wrist, offered palm up from that black like a question I was too small to answer. I've told this story out loud, maybe 5 times in my life. Each time I stripped pieces off it to make it easier to carry. I was young, I was dreaming, it was a shadow, it was a trick of the eyes. The people who love me accept those easy versions because they want to and because I let them, but it happened, and what followed happened, and I am going to try, for once, to tell it the way it sits in me. Not tidy, not cinematic, just true. The first night, I woke like a switch had been thrown. Not the slow surface float of normal waking, but up and bright all at once. Lungs tight, wide awake inside a small body. The orange nightlight shoved a soft wedge of color into the hall. I could see Mom and my baby sister on their blankets. Could hear Dad's slow breathing drifting up from the couch downstairs. Something was tapping. Not on wood. Inside it. Tap, tap, tap. Long pauses. Patient. Our sewing room had no door, just a rectangular opening 3 steps down the hall. During the day, it was the loudest room in the house. Machine thrum. Scissors biting fabric. The little ping of pins falling. Mom humming over measuring tape. That night, it was a mouth without a tongue. I crawled to the doorway and stopped. There are kinds of darkness you can still see in. The dark of closets and theaters. The dark of the backyard if you wait for your eyes to stretch into it. This wasn't that. It was blackness that existed in front of the room. A surface. It felt like my face was close to glass, except there was no reflection. The hand came out of that black the way a word comes out of a mouth. Palm up, fingers long. Every part of it made of the same impossible nothing as the void behind it. Not a silhouette, not shadow. The opposite of light given shape. It didn't grab for me. It didn't even move. It waited, as if I were late for an appointment I didn't know about. I would like to say I screamed. I would like to say I ran. I didn't. I sat there breathing very quietly until I heard Dad stand up downstairs, until his steps creaked the first stair, until the hand slipped back into black as smoothly as a fish into deep water. "What are you doing up?" he said behind me. He carried me back to my blanket and closed the door all the way, like a parent does 100 times without thinking about the room it cuts off. That should be the end, if stories behaved. But the tapping came back, and so did the black, the house and its rules. We moved into that place because it was what we could afford, and because the light in the kitchen made my mother's face look younger when she stood near the sink. My father said the bones were good. I later learned that people say that about houses when they mean the opposite of what they fear. That the bones are what you can't see and won't be able to fix. The sewing room had been a bedroom once, long before us. Someone had taken the door off, patched a vent, run a mess of extension cords across a wall, and then coiled them back, as if a project had been started and then abandoned mid-breath. The room looked normal in daylight, if you didn't stare too long at the place where the baseboard didn't quite meet the jamb. My mom didn't like to sew after dark anymore. She said her eyes got tired. She said pinheads looked like moving insects when the lamp hit them wrong. She said a lot of things to avoid saying the one on her face. I don't want to be in that room when the house is listening. There were rules. They accreted slowly like limescale. Little constraints that grew into a shape. Don't answer if you can't see the mouth. Don't stand with your back to the hall. When you're at the machine, don't leave the nightlight off. If you wake up sweating, do not wipe the window. Let the condensation slide where it wants. If you hear tapping, count to 3 between each one. And if the count goes wrong, wake Dad. Those rules worked in the way sandbags work in a flood. Imperfectly, temporarily, but enough to keep your feet dry while the water insists. Tapping that wasn't mine. When I was 6, Mom taught me to clap patterns from a song she loved as a kid. We tapped them on the table. Hers clean and quick, mine sloppy. Both of us laughing when I missed the split-second silence in the middle that makes the rhythm swing. The first time the tapping in the night matched that rhythm, I cried. Kids are good at pretending until a thing pretends back. The second time, I tapped once, just once back. Tap, silence. Then, tap, tap, tap. It was close but wrong, like an echo that wanted to turn. It didn't feel like call and response. It felt like rehearsal from the other side of a wall. I stopped tapping after that. I started counting. The numbers steadied me, even when the taps arrived on wrong counts on purpose, like the house was learning breath control. The black that moved. I didn't see the hand again for years. The black stayed. It learned new ways to be itself. Once, when Mom's machine jammed and she swore under her breath and cut the thread with her teeth, the black advanced across the doorway until it swallowed the orange light at my feet. The floor beneath my palms went colder, not as air does, but as water does, and I understood, not with words, but with that other kind of body knowledge children have, what my father meant when he said the bones were good. The bones were patient. "Bed," he said, not looking up from the bills he was pressing flat with his palm. I went. He blew out the nightlight and turned it on again and then off, like a person testing a switch to make sure a cause still makes effect. It did. For a while. The day version of the story. Here is the daytime, adult version of the story that I tell at cookouts if someone gets me near candles and asks the question everybody asks when lights are low and nobody wants to go home yet. Have you ever seen anything? I smile and say, when I was little, our sewing room felt weird. Sometimes I thought I saw something. I'm sure it was the streetlight and the way our hallway trapped it. Or my mom worked nights sometimes and the machine noise made me dream. Kids wake up wrong. Or if I am with friends who read things I read, there's this thing called palinopsia. Your brain repeats images. It happens. Once I thought a doorway was a black square. Sleep paralysis. You know, those versions are true in the way a map is true. They get you to the place without saying what the place smells like. The real version kept going. The hand returns. I was 8 the second time it offered the palm. It happened on a night when my sister had a fever, and the house felt like it was simmering under its own roof. The tapping had been small and precise for weeks. That night, It was a single knock, and then my name, not said but shaped, the way you know a word is yours, even when you can only see it on someone's lips. I remember pushing the door open with 2 fingers and seeing the black like a slab, flush with the wall, and thinking, there is no room for a room. And then the hand, gentle as prayer, arriving out of that slab at the height of my chin, still palm up, still waiting, still not moving unless being present counts as motion. I reached toward it. Of course I did. Kids reach toward new things. My fingers didn't touch anything. And yet something noticed them. A pressure in the air the way you feel when you hold your hand near an old TV and the static at the surface of the world plucks the hair on your wrist. I didn't pull back until something else changed. The temperature. It dropped in a clean slice, a line from my elbow down, as if I had stuck my forearm through a waterfall. The part of me in the room's air stayed warm. The part of me near the hand went cold so fast my skin ached. I whispered, Mom. The hand retracted. Not fast, not alarmed. It simply withdrew, and for the first time I understood that retreat is not the opposite of approach. Dad's refusal. My father did not believe in ghosts. He believed in receipts and batteries, and making sure the angle of the thing matched the line you'd drawn for it. He believed in illness you could see on a chart, and repairs you could schedule. He let my mother smudge sage because it made her feel better, and because smoke in a house is as old as houses. He didn't go to church, but nodded when people said pray for us, because he knew the relief of being spoken to gently. When I told him about the hand for the second time, he did not say no. He said, what do you need to feel safe? I didn't know. He left the hallway lamp on and the bathroom light on, and the little light on the answering machine on, and called that constellation safety. He put his toolbox in the sewing room on a Saturday afternoon and tightened screws that were already tight and reseated an outlet and ran his fingers along the seam where baseboard met jamb and said, in a non-committal way. That night, the tapping didn't come. The night after, it came softer. On the 3rd night, it returned as if it had been resting. He stopped fixing the sewing room after that. He didn't move around it like a man avoiding superstition. He moved around it the way you move around a sleeping child you don't want to wake. The experiment. In 5th grade, I learned about spectrograms in science class, how sound makes pictures you can see. I borrowed a little tape recorder from the library under the lie of a school project and set it on the hallway carpet facing the sewing room. I did not ask permission. I pressed record and tried to fall asleep on purpose. 3 taps woke me. 3 evenly spaced taps, each a little flatter than the ones I knew. The recorder sat where I'd left it, its little red eye stubborn and steady, like it was sure a job done consistently would be a job done well. The next morning, when the house was loud with cereal and socks and the smell of dryer sheets, I listened. There they were. Tap, 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 except they weren't just taps. Under them was a hiss like a radiator with water trapped in it. I brought the recorder to school, lied again, and convinced a computer teacher to let me load the file. The spectrogram showed 3 bright vertical lines, and between them, a low band of gray-green like algae on stone. The teacher said, air conditioner, and moved on. I don't know what I wanted the picture to prove. I think I wanted to show a shape I could learn to recognize. This is what a hand sounds like when it comes out of the dark. The seam. We moved out when I was 12. Not because of the sewing room, because life moves. The new place had a yard with 1 tree and a kitchen with light that made my mother look tired again. We boxed a machine, and I tried to feel only the normal sad of leaving a place where your pencil marks on the doorframe show your body's insistence on becoming. On the last day, with the living room echoing and the refrigerator door tied shut with twine, I walked to the sewing room and looked at the jamb one last time. The seam, the place where the carpenter's blade had met the painter's caulk, was different. It had always been imperfect, a hairline where dust loved to gather. On that day, I could slide my fingernail into it and feel the tiniest give, like a mouth letting a straw pass. I pressed my ear to it and listened. Nothing, or rather, everything the house had ever not said at once. I left my fingernail marked there. I didn't tell anyone. The years of pretending. It would be neater if the black followed me. It didn't. What followed me was the habit of looking for it. I cupped my hands around the edges of new doorways and felt air temperature the way a dog tastes wind. I avoided sitting with my back to any opening without a door. I learned to sleep with a small lamp on, not because I believed light could keep anything away, but because it kept me honest about what I could and couldn't see. I learned other adult tricks too. How to talk about houses as investments and about neighborhoods as up and coming. How to stand at a window and say, "Great exposure," while every part of me measured whether this glass remembered cold palms. I dated people who slept with confidence. I watched them turn the lights off and trust the dark to mind its own business. I didn't tell them about the hand. I didn't even tell myself. You can fold a truth so small it feels like relief in your pocket. I went home for holidays to a different home, because that's how time behaves. I built apps for money and later wrote grant reports for a nonprofit, and then did both for a while, because rent is a plot twist in all our stories. I bought a plant and killed it, and bought another and kept it alive and thought, I am a person who can sustain green things now. For years, nothing happened. The silence in that nothing wasn't empty. It was a room I'd walked out of where someone had stayed. Waiting. The letter. It came from a title company, one of those off-highway offices that smell like coffee and toner, with my name misspelled, but close enough to get to me. Inside, a photocopy of Platt. A note. We are updating records associated with address. Please verify the boundary descriptions match your recollection. I didn't own that house. I had never owned that house. I called the number anyway, and a woman with a careful voice explained that my mother had put me down decades ago as an interested party on some piece of paper no one could find now. It's probably nothing, she said. We're cleaning up old files. She emailed me scans. There was our little street. There was our box of a lot. There was a penciled rectangle sketched inside the footprint of the house, not to scale, annotated in handwriting I didn't recognize. Void/utility? A dotted line ran across it to margin, where someone had written no access from interior. The date on the corner was 2 years before we moved in. I asked for the underlying documents. She said she'd look. She didn't call back. The scan sat in my inbox like a hand turned palm up. Going back. You shouldn't go back. Everyone says so, and everyone is correct, and still we go. I went on a late afternoon that pretended to be spring, but smelled like winter's breath. The house was painted a new color and had a new mail slot, and a very precise metal number screwed into the siding that didn't match the style of the porch light. The shape was the same. Bones don't take paint. I stood on the sidewalk and practiced leaving. I did not leave. A woman in a purple sweatshirt came out to get a package and saw me and did not smile. I waved the paperwork like a passport. I grew up here. I lied in the right direction. There's a weird note in the county file, and I did not know what I was just. Curious? Haunted? Rude? She looked past me the way you look at rain, to see if it will commit. 5 minutes, she said. Inside, it was both smaller and larger than I remembered. The ceiling closer, the rooms longer. The hall was the same long breath. The sewing room was a nursery now. White crib, white dresser, a monitor with a camera shaped like a small friendly robot. There was a door on the opening. A real door. Painted blue. My hand went numb at the sight of it, the way your mouth goes numb when you bite foil. Do you mind if I said, and she was already lifting the latch and opening the door to show me how normal a room can be with a door, how tidy it is to separate spaces with hardware. The room looked fine. No black, no edges misbehaving. The baseboard met the jamb without a whisper of a seam. The woman spoke softly because the baby was asleep and because this was the kind of house where people lowered their voices without noticing why. Any weird noises? I asked with the fake brightness of someone who expects to be dismissed. Old houses make sounds, she said. Then, as if she were correcting herself before I could, sometimes the camera glitches. Static at odd hours. The pediatrician says it's fine. We moved the crib away from a wall. She gestured vaguely at the far corner, as if the room were the kind of place you can point at without pointing at anything in particular. I thanked her and left before she could find a polite way to let me. On the sidewalk, I stood and breathed carefully until my hands stopped tingling. That night, The tapping woke me for the first time in years. 1, 2, 3. I lay still and counted each breath and thought, okay, the message is, adults make rules too. Mine were pragmatic. If it begins, document. If you can document, you can survive it. My phone recorded 6 nights of nothing, then 1 night of everything. The tapping was there, measured and patient. Between taps, a thin mechanical chirp the algorithm labeled appliance, which is a kind of word an app uses when it doesn't want to scare you. I bought a little thermal camera attachment because that's what a person does when they're trying to name the invisible. I swept it across my apartment doorway and pretended I didn't feel stupid. On the 7th night, the feed showed a pale rectangle of cold where warm walls should be. The shape was the size of a door and the height of a person's attention. I told no one. I should have. There's a special stupidity in being alone on purpose. The next morning, words appeared on the inside of my bedroom window when the sun warmed the glass. Not real words. The idea of words. The way frost suggests letters when you squint. A cluster of curved shapes like a language that had chosen different bones for its alphabet. I wiped the glass and the streaks smeared into nothing. That night the same arcs returned in the fog of my breath when I checked. And this time I didn't wipe them. I watched them fade and then felt silly for waiting for a sign to blink at me like a cursor. But there was a sign. While I watched the fog letters evaporate, the tapping answered my heart instead of my count. Tap when I exhaled. Tap when I held my breath too long. Tap when I tried not to think. I pressed my palm to the cool paint beside the door and whispered, I hear you, and hated myself for the intimacy of the sentence. The hand did not come. It didn't need to. It had learned my rhythm and was patient. I tell someone, the first person I told was the wrong person and the right one. Her name is Leah. She collects instruments she can barely play and keeps spare toothbrushes at my place without asking, and can sit in silence with me for entire movies without looking at her phone. She's also the most practically superstitious person I know. She throws salt over both shoulders when she spills it, not because she believes in devils, but because she believes in the safety of habits. We were in bed on a Sunday, the kind of morning where the city is soft and far away, and I said, I had a thing in my old house. She propped herself up on an elbow and looked at me like people look at dogs about a bolt. Attentive, non-judgmental, braced for movement. I told the mild version first. Then the other one. I told her about the hand. She didn't laugh. She didn't say, that's scary, and leave it there. She said, what did it want you to do? The question surprised me because it implied agency. Not mine, but its. I had spent so long being careful not to grant it verbs. I don't know, I said, which was the truest and stupidest answer. She asked to hear the taps, and I played her file and watched her face for signs of dismissal. She closed her eyes like she was listening to a piece of music. After the 3rd tap, she tapped back once on my arm gently and said, if you reply, you're in conversation. I know, I said. Do you want to be? She asked. I didn't answer. The real answer was yes. We set up a camera anyway. Pointed not at the door, but at me, because she said if the story was about me, I should be in it. That night, I slept 3 hours and woke to thin aggressive loneliness that visits apartments at 3:11 a.m. The tapping waited until I sat up. It was louder than it had been in years. Leah sat up too. Don't talk to it, she whispered. We're just listening. The hand didn't come. The thermal camera showed a colder patch that looked like a person had stood too long facing my door. The audio showed taps that fell a fraction closer together than before, as if someone were practicing patience and losing. The file saved the cloud. The cloud mislabeled it appliance. The invitation. On the 11th night after I visited the old house, the tapping stopped pretending it was anything else. It tapped 3 times, paused, and then tapped a pattern I knew but had never heard from it. My mother's old clapping game, the one I'd stopped playing, because mouth should belong to people. I got out of bed and stood at the door, because that is the stupid brave thing people do in movies, and in real life when movies have taught them where to stand. I pressed my palm to the paint, slid it down until I felt the seam where the jam meets drywall, and waited. My skin went cold from knuckles to wrist in a clean line. The temperature reading on the phone dipped 3 degrees in 1 second. And then No hand. Not yet. A pressure from the other side. The exact pressure you feel when someone mirrors your hand on glass. I mirrored back. My palm met a negative of warmth. The idea of touch made of absence. Leah whispered, "Stop." It wasn't instruction. It was a wish. I didn't stop. The pressure increased and then, so smoothly, slid upward to the height of my face. It stayed there as if measuring my features with radar. My eyes watered as if I'd been looking too long at a screen. I blinked. Something blinked back. Not eyes, not light, but a sympathetic movement at my eyelid's pace. "Enough," Leah said, loud now. She took my wrist and pulled me back and turned on all the lights as if she could multiply reassurance. The pressure fell away like a coat taken off a chair. We stayed up until it was light and ate cereal dry from the box and pretended to be new people who had not done what we had done. After, the next week I went to work and wrote code and heard the taps in the space bar of my keyboard. I stood at crosswalks and counted to 3 and thought of hands. I was patient with bad coffee and a bad meeting, and then mean to a stranger on the train for sneezing in the wrong rhythm, and then apologize out loud to no one because a stranger had already gotten off and mea culpas need a mouth to aim at. On Wednesday, I woke to find 5 ovals on the inside of my window, evenly spaced and slightly elongated, fog from breath that wasn't mine. The marks were at the height of my face. On Thursday, the tapping came from the kitchen wall, not the door. The next night, from the ceiling corner. On Saturday, from the floor beneath my bed. Leah said, "You gave it a bigger map." "I think it always had the map." I said, "I just gave it permission to mark me on it." She said, "Then unmark it." "How?" She shrugged. "People break pacts all the time. We just usually call them habits. We smudged because my mother would have. We said prayers because her grandmother would have. We put salt at the thresholds because humans love lines. The tapping skipped a night like a dancer shifting weight. Then it returned, and this time it brought a smell with it. Wet cloth. Not mildew. Fresh wet, like laundry lifted too soon from a machine. The scent moved, the way a person moves, in a slow path from the door to bed, and then paused at the height of my face. "I don't think it's trying to scare me," I said, and Leah said, "I don't think it's trying not to." The hole that isn't a hole. One of the worst things I did was take the cover off the return vent in the hallway. I unscrewed it at 2 p.m. on a bright Tuesday, like a thief choosing noon, to steal an apple. Inside was a rectangle of duct and dust. At the far end I could see a joint where 2 runs met. Nothing unusual. Nothing wrong. I leaned down and breathed in and expected old air. I smelled cold. You don't think cold has a smell until you recognize it. The penny metal scent of refrigerator air, the clean dry of newly opened winter. I put my face closer and thought about children sticking tongues to poles. I pressed my palm against the metal, and it hummed at me in a way that felt personal. The phone camera saw nothing but gray. The thermal attachment made the back of the duct look like a lake in February. I closed the vent and stood up too fast, and the hallway swam, and I said, "I'm done," out loud, as if houses respected declarations. That night, no tapping. The night after, a single tap. The night after that, nothing again. Then, at 3:19, a soft scrape on the inside of the vent cover, like a person without fingernails testing the distance to the screw. I left the apartment and walked until morning. Well, I didn't tell my parents. My father died the year the city shut down. My mother moved into a smaller place and learned to sleep with podcasts on low, human voices talking about movies and cooking and history, while she drifted into a place where old rooms couldn't find her as easily. I never told her the true version of the sewing room. I told her the map. She deserved the map. At his funeral, I stood under a tent with 6 other people and listened to the rain, trying to make a point on plastic. My sister said, "Do you remember the orange light?" I said yes and hugged her for an extra second, because sometimes love is agreeing that you remember the same color. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. I checked it like a bad friend. No message, just a calendar alert I didn't set, reminding me to check the seam. I deleted it and told myself I had tapped something by mistake, and that my grief had big fingers. That night, I heard one soft tap in the hotel room from the direction of the closet. The lamp was already on. I said, "Not tonight," and the silence that followed had the shape of a shrug. The last time, so far, I know people want a climax, a moment, the part in the movie where the hero shut the door, or opened it, or put their hand through and saw a different world. I wish my ending worked that way. The last time is a small story with a large shadow. A neighbor's kid lost a ball in the stairwell. I bent to pick it up and saw, at floor level, a hairline in the paint. One of those harmless cracks buildings grow like stretch marks. Except this one had length, but not width. It ran straight for almost a foot and then did something cracks don't do. It took a sharp turn and continued at a perfect right angle for 6 inches, and then stopped, as if a carpenter had changed his mind. I pressed my fingernail to it and felt a little give like old caulk. At 3:14 that night, the tapping woke me. Not at the door, not at the vent, not at the ceiling. At the baseboard by the bed, right where a wall meets a world. I lay there and put my hand, palm down, on the floor. The wood was cool, the cool of shade on a summer sidewalk, not the cool of a void. The tapping went quiet, and in its place came a softer thing, the sort of pressure you feel in your ears right before a plane lands. A change. I slid down until my cheek touched the floorboards. I don't know why. Maybe I was trying to see the world from a shorter height. I looked along the baseboard seam, and for a fraction of a second it looked back. Not with eyes, with attention. The kind you feel in a crowded room when you realize someone has been waiting for you to notice them. I said, without planning to, "I won't go." The words tasted like old coins. The pressure eased. I felt foolish and relieved, and sad in a way that felt bigger than me. I moved my mattress the next day. I salted the seam. I bought a rug. I told Leah it's over and meant until she kissed my temple like a person blessing a spot they can't protect. The tapping hasn't stopped. It changed. It learned patience from me, and now it uses it against me the way only companions can. It taps when I'm about to sleep, and when I don't answer, it taps after I have, and leaves me in the morning with the feeling you get when someone hung up without saying goodbye. The hand hasn't returned in a way I can name. But sometimes the air near my face gets cold in a straight line from knuckle to wrist, and sometimes the window remembers letters I can't read, and sometimes I wake at the exact minute before a thing begins and hear nothing and want to clap and do not. What I think and what I don't know what it is. I have used all the words people use when faced with rooms that behave like people. Haunting, threshold, thin place, attention, parasite, ancestor, trick. I have tried not to give it a name, because names are leashes and labels both, and I don't know which one I'd be holding. I do not think it wants to harm me. I do not think it wants to not harm me. I think it wants me to know that it can wait longer than I can. Some nights I am brave in the small, useless way bravery shows up in apartments. I sleep with the light off. I let the tap come and go. I put my hand out and then pull it back before the cold begins. Other nights I am a person with old rules and new salt and a lamp that stays on. I would like to tell you that one of these ways works. They don't. What works is living anyway. If you ask me for advice, and please don't, I would say this. Do not answer your name unless you can see the mouth that says it. Do not promise a room anything you can't deliver. Do not put your face all the way to a seam. But also, do not pretend you don't live inside a house with bones. You do. We all do. We call them thresholds because we like to think we are the ones crossing. Sometimes they cross us. I think about the hand more kindly now than I did when I was a kid. It wasn't reaching. It was offering. That doesn't make the offer safe. It makes it honest. There is a difference between an invitation and a demand. There is also a sameness. When the invitation comes from a room, you will spend the rest of your life declining politely. Tonight, I will sleep with the lamp off. Or I will try to. I will count to 3 between breaths, because numbers are the only lullaby I'll accept. If the tapping comes, I will let it. If the cold line reaches my knuckles, I will mark the place with my thumb and move my hand and not move it back. In the morning, if the window writes to me, I will not wipe it. I will read what I can't read until the letters turn to water. And someday, when I am brave or foolish or simply tired enough of being both, I will go back to a house with a door that used to be an opening and stand in the hallway and look at the seam and knock once, not to ask for entry, to say as a courtesy that I still remember where the bones pinch. If something answers, I will do what I've done since I was 5. I will not take the hand. I will listen until the tapping stops. And then I will go to bed with the light on and sleep like a person who knows that the dark knows her name and is choosing for now to say nothing at all. Every night, there's a true story that echoes in the dark about someone who vanished, a house that shouldn't exist, and a mystery that refuses to die. Tonight, I'll tell you one of them just before you fall asleep. I lived in that house for 23 years. 23 years of unexplained noises, of feeling watched, of running up the stairs because something felt like it was chasing me. I think a part of me always knew something wasn't right with our family home. But when you grow up somewhere, you learn to normalize things that shouldn't be normal. The stairs were always the worst. Going up them felt like being chased by something you couldn't see, but could definitely feel. That heavy, cold presence right behind you that made your skin crawl and your heart race. I remember taking those stairs 2 at a time, practically launching myself onto the landing just to get away from whatever was following me. But the basement was a whole other level of wrong. I avoided going down there as much as possible, especially after what my parents saw. They were both downstairs doing laundry one afternoon when they saw it, a black mist like a cloud of darkness gliding across the floor and disappearing underneath the basement stairs. My mom tried to rationalize it as a shadow or some trick of the light, but my dad wouldn't even talk about it. After that day, I noticed he started doing laundry during daylight hours only, never at night. Being home alone was the worst. The house would make these banging noises that couldn't be explained away by old pipes or the house settling. They were deliberate, like something was trying to get my attention. Something wanted me to know I wasn't really alone. I remember one afternoon when I was 16, homesick from school. My parents were at work, and I was dozing on the couch when I heard 3 loud bangs from upstairs like someone was slamming a door. Then footsteps walking back and forth above me. I called out thinking maybe someone had come home early, but there was no answer, just more footsteps. I was too terrified to go upstairs and check. So I just sat there frozen, the TV muted, listening to whatever was up there, pacing back and forth for what felt like hours. Nights were the worst, though. I'd stay up late watching TV in the living room, and then when I finally decided to go to bed, I'd feel this overwhelming urge to run. Not walk, run. I'd sprint up those stairs, dash down the hallway, and slam my bedroom door closed behind me, heart pounding in my chest. Sometimes I'd even lock it, though I couldn't really explain why. I just knew I needed that barrier between me and whatever was out there in the dark. But the locked door didn't always help because sometimes the thing was already in my room, hiding in my closet. I was 18 when I saw it the first time. I'd gotten up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. When I came back, my closet door was cracked open about 6 inches. I was sure I'd closed it before going to bed. I always did. But there it was, open just enough for something to reach through. And as I stood there trying to convince myself to walk across my room and close it, a hand emerged from the darkness. It wasn't a normal hand. It was grayish black, like charred meat with skin that looked dead and decayed. The fingers were too long, ending in yellow claw-like nails that curved slightly at the tips. The hand just glided out a gap in the door, then moved slowly up and down along the opening like it was feeling for something. Maybe feeling for me. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just stood there, my back pressed against my bedroom wall, watching this thing moving in the dim light from my alarm clock. After what felt like forever, the hand retreated back into the closet. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat up in bed with my light on until morning, staring at that closet door, terrified it would open again. I never told anyone about the hand. It seemed too crazy, too impossible to explain. I thought maybe I dreamed it or hallucinated from lack of sleep, but deep down I knew what I saw was real. The second encounter I can't explain away or rationalize, and it still gives me chills to think about. It happened about 2 years after my older brother died. It was devastating for all of us. He was only 25, killed in a car accident. The grief in our house was suffocating for months afterward. One night, about 6 months after his funeral, I woke up around 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm not sure what woke me. Maybe a noise in the hallway. When I opened my eyes, I saw a figure walking slowly past my door, which I'd left cracked open that night. It was dark, but there was enough ambient light from the bathroom nightlight to see it was a person-shaped shadow. At first, I thought it was my dad checking on us, which he sometimes did when he couldn't sleep. But something about the way it moved felt wrong. It was too fluid, too quiet, and as it passed by, I realized with absolute certainty that it had my brother's shape, his broad shoulders, the slight forward hunch he always had, even the way his hair stuck up in the back. The shadow paused outside my other brother's room and seemed to peer inside, tilting its head in a way that was so achingly familiar, so distinctly my dead brother's mannerism, that tears immediately sprang to my eyes. "Dad!" I called out, my voice shaking, hoping against hope that it was just my father checking on us, and my grief-stricken mind was playing tricks on me. The figure didn't respond or turn. It just stayed there looking into my brother's room. Then my mom's door opened down the hall, and light spilled out into the corridor. She must have heard me call out. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. But I couldn't answer her because I was watching the shadow figure dissolve. Not walk away, not step into a room, but literally dissipate into the air the moment the light touched it. It didn't gradually fade. It was just there 1 second, and gone the next. My mom found me sitting up in bed, staring wide-eyed into the hall. When I told her what I'd seen, she got this look on her face. Not disbelief, but recognition. She sat down on my bed and told me that she'd been hearing my brother's voice calling her name always when she was alone in the house. She thought she was going crazy with grief. After that night, we both knew there was more to it than imagination. The nightmares were another constant in that house. Horrible, gruesome dreams that would leave me gasping awake, drenched in sweat. I'd dream of being chased through endless hallways by things I couldn't see but knew were monstrous. I'd dream of rotting corpses reaching for me from under my bed, their fingers brushing against my ankles. I'd dream of the devil, which was weird because my family wasn't particularly religious. In these dreams, the devil wasn't the cartoonish red guy with horns. He was a presence, a voice, a feeling of absolute dread and malice. He'd speak to me in these dreams, telling me horrible things would happen to my family. I'd wake up with the absolute conviction that something truly evil had been communicating with me. Then there was the sleep paralysis. I didn't know that's what it was called until years later. All I knew was that sometimes I'd wake up unable to move, unable to scream, with the absolute certainty that something was in my room with me. I could feel it watching me, waiting, enjoying my